Hi, this is Marla. Welcome back to my channel. Today we're creating this beautiful Christmas scene using the Layering Church with Lantern and Christmas Tree die from Scrappy Tails Craft. I thought that this would create a beautiful winter scene, and it absolutely did. Here's a look at the church and the dies. This is a die that I didn't end up using on my card today, so just disregard that particular die because I chose to go with the slimline instead. I had my magicals sitting on my desk, and I had created these two panels using Mountain Meadow Green for the lighter color and Evergreen Emerald for this darker color, and I thought that they would be really pretty for the Christmas trees. I love using magicals. I love using mixed media, so sprays and watercolor, and this card actually is going to have a little bit of gesso, not by design, but because I made a mistake and I needed to cover something up. But I love when I get to play with the magicals because I think that they're just so much fun. They create a lot of texture on the die cuts, as you're going to see. Again, I'm going to have some darker trees and some lighter trees, and I think that that just adds to the charm of this Christmas card. I do end up cutting out that Christmas tree 5 times, and now I'm going to work on my lanterns. So I have another piece of Canson XL watercolor paper. I've spritzed it with water. It's important to spritz your paper with water before you add the magicals, because if you add the magicals to a dry panel and you spray your water on top, a lot of times it is just going to blow on your desk because it doesn't have anything to adhere to, so that water is a binder. And there wasn't enough of the cattail copper brown, which is the color that I'm using, to my liking, so I went ahead and added just a little bit more, and now I'm using my brush to move it around. So sometimes you get some concentrated areas of the powder that just doesn't want to move no matter how much water you put on it, and using a paintbrush to gently move it does allow that to get incorporated into your panel a little bit better. You can see that even though I did use that paintbrush, I still have a variation in color because there are multiple colors inside the magicals. I have some lighter areas, some yellow areas, some really copper areas, but I wanted to add a little bit of gold. So again, I spritzed my panel with water, and I have this Bayou Boogie Gold, and I'm going to add that to my panel, spritz it again to get a little bit more of that gold in there. This really does have a nice sparkle to it. It's really hard to capture on camera, but I wanted even more of that copper. So when I do cut my lanterns out, some of my lanterns are going to be a little bit lighter, a little bit darker. I ended up cutting 3 and using 2 on my panel. I wasn't quite sure what I was going to do, but they aren't exactly the same color. And again, that's something that I really like about doing a mixed media card, is that it's not predictable. I wanted to pick up some of that other color, so this is a dry panel, and I'm just tapping it onto the solution that's left on my desk. I'm going to go ahead and die cut one of the lanterns so you can see, and then I will die cut the other 2 off camera, and we are going to move along to the church. I thought it would be really charming to have a pink church. I actually end up having one that's a little bit darker than pink, but I thought that it would just be something a little bit different. I think that Christmas is a magical season, and we can do anything that we want at Christmas time, and it's going to work on a Christmas card. So here I'm adding that Autumn Maple Crimson to my desk. It's a very dark concentrated color. In fact, I added more than I really needed onto my desk. You really don't need that much of this powder. This powder is going to last you a lifetime. But so I'm going to do the swiping again. I did spritz my panel with some water, and I'm just soaking it in there. I thought I would do the swiping, but then I thought, no, I want to get a base layer down. When you are adding the magicals each layer, so as I mentioned, it's important to dry in between. If I were to put another color on top of this, it's going to start melding together and it's going to become its own new color. So what I do is I use one color, I dry in between. For this one, I went ahead and tapped a little bit more on so that I got a little bit more movement onto that panel. And then here I'm adding a second color, and this is more of a purpley magenta-ish color. It's called Foxglove Fuchsia. And I'm going to go ahead and add that to get a little bit more of that pink into this panel. This panel is actually going to be used to cut the trim out for most of my elements. So for the window of the church, and then for the frame that the doors are going to go on, and it's going to add just that little bit of pop. And then for the base of the church, I'm going to use this panel. So I'm picking up that Foxglove Fuchsia and I'm drying in between. I added a couple layers of that color. You can see in the church that it's a lot deeper because of the layers that I added. Now I cut the door stoop out of the autumn maple crimson, and then I cut the stairs and the doors, as I mentioned, from the Foxglove Fuchsia. I did create a yellow panel using some other magicals, and that is just so that I could have some illumination behind my windows and behind my lampposts, and I cut all of that off screen. So I'm adding the transom to the top of the door stoop, and then I'll add the roof line to that. And then I'm off camera, I'm going to put all of those backings onto the windows. I will show you how I added the piece to the lamppost. So Sabrina has thought of everything. There are 2 die cuts, one for the window frame, and then there's one that's a solid piece for the backing. And I chose to go with a yellow to go with an illumination to make my scene appear as if it were nighttime. I'm going to start putting the church together, so I'm going to add that stoop to the middle. I'll add a window to the left and the right side, and then I'm going to add the larger window, which would be really pretty if you wanted to color it in stained glass colors. I'm going to add that up onto the top. We'll set that aside. The trees, I did want to mention that there is a string of garland that kind of goes through it, so you can punch that out and put a different color cardstock behind it so it appeared like it had garland, but I didn't want that. In fact, I am going to end up cutting the stars off the trees. I'm going to do just a triangular cut on those trees. Easy peasy, and again, it's another way that you can use those pine trees year round. So you could use them in a summer camping scene. All you need to do is just slice off that little star right here is where I'm going to do that. And it's easy to cut off. You just cut at an angle and then cut back around. So now I'm going to move on to my background. And for my background, I did cut the panel to 4x9 because the top of the church was so tall. And I've spritzed my panel with water. Again, this is Canson XL watercolor paper. And I'm using Tibetan teal for my night sky. Now I did end up getting a little bit of that teal into an area I didn't want to. My intent was for the bottom of this to be snow. So I am going to have to remedy that with some gesso. I dried my panel in between. Now I'm picking up some more of the layers, again adding texture to that sky, and then I'll dry my panel and we'll bring in that gesso and a paintbrush. I'm going to add texture texture, so I'm not going to paint this on smooth. I am doing a tapping motion. I'm going to be very heavy-handed over on the right-hand side because, again, I wanted to cover up that teal color. It's not going to be perfect, but by the time I place my trees down, you're really not going to notice it at all. I do dry this with my heat tool. There was a little bit of wetness still on it, but it wasn't enough that I couldn't continue with my card, so I did add some double-sided tape to the back of this. I used tape instead of wet glue because this is warped because of the gesso work and because of all the water that I've added to it. So I want to make sure that it sits on my card panel nice and smooth, and by adding that double-sided tape, it's going to allow it to sit on my card base, and I'm not going to have any of that warping showing. I'm going to add some foam tape to 2 of the trees, and I'm also going to add it to the church. I wanted that to have a little bit of dimension. I love dimension on my cards. And once I finish adding the foam tape, I think about putting it on, so you're going to see, and I thought, nope, put your trees down first, because if I put my church where I can't get the other trees in, I would be very sad. So I'm going to glue one to the left side, and then I'll add another one on the right with the foam tape. And again, the front ones are going to have that dimension. And then I'll add 3 to the right side. I went back and forth about a sentiment. I do have room in the sky for me to add a sentiment, but as I was looking at it, the sentiments that I had, I don't know, it just seemed like it wasn't going to be balanced if I added the sentiment. So I am going to add a sentiment when I send it in the mail on the inside. I have lots of stamps that I can use that have, wishing you peace, love, and joy. I think that this is really a very peaceful scene, so it would fit perfectly on this composition. So I chose to leave the sentiment off. I'm going to glue 2 of these straight down to the panel. I'm going to have to lift up that first one right here because I want this one to be in the back. So I want that tree to appear as if it is further away. And then I'll add foam tape to the final tree that I'm going to add. I'm going to put one of the lanterns to the far left, and then I'll move the second lantern is going to be more towards closer to the church than this one is. I didn't want everything to be perfect on the card. I wanted it to appear that maybe there were lanterns sporadically set throughout the street, and they weren't all the same distance apart. I don't know. That was just my thought. I just thought it would be too matchy-matchy if I put it in the exact same space, but I am going to put it on top of that center tree on the right-hand side, right there. For the wreaths, I do have these little dots from scrapbook.com that are foam, and they fit nicely into small places. So I wanted these wreaths to pop up, so I am going to go ahead and add that foam tape to the back of that, and I'm going to attach that to my lantern. Once I do that, I am going to add the church to the center. Now look, you kind of have a little walkway. So Sabrina has some deer dies, and I think that the deer would be really pretty in this scene if you didn't want to add the church, but I decided to go with that church. There's been so many innovative products for the lanterns that were released, and this is one of them, but I think that if you look past the lantern, these can be used at different times throughout the year. I think that if you didn't make this a Christmas scene and you didn't color your church pink, that you certainly could use this as a sympathy card. That would be a nice way to send a card to somebody who had just suffered a loss. But for my card today, I'm going to make it a Christmas card, and a Christmas card needs a little bit of snow, so I did add that snow to my background, and that finishes off my card for today. I want to thank you so much for joining me. Here's a close-up look at the finished card. Until next time, I hope you have a very Merry Christmas, and thank you so much for watching.